On to the second arc. Actually, maybe I should hold off on the excitement because, while this is a big milestone to have reached, closely analyzing each book in the second arc isn't a very thrilling prospect. As a whole, it is often ranked as one of the worst arcs the series has put forward, either because of how boring it is, how underdeveloped the characters are, or how out of whack the second half is. But it is also an important job, as the new prophecy lays out the groundwork for the entirety of the series to come. A lot of the tropes, situations, characters, and locations that will become staples later on will be introduced somewhere in these 6 books. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As ever, I will judge these books one at a time, as we build our picture of the series. Midnight was released on May 10th of 2005, about 7 months after The Darkest Hour, which makes sense considering they needed to begin a whole new series. But there very well could be an additional reason for the longer wait time. This arc wasn't initially supposed to exist. Vicky and the publishers were originally planning to just write the first arc and leave the series be, which explains the more self-contained nature. However, when Warriors started selling well, they decided to write more. Originally, even that new series was only going to have 3 books and be a sort of epilogue arc to the original series, rather than the bouncing off point for a whole new era of its own. This fact will help explain some of the problems this arc runs into, so I'd ask you to remember it for later. For now, though, I'll just say that Midnight was written by Cherith Baldry, who, over the course of the first arc and beyond, showed that, in comparison to Kate Carey, she was quite good at writing plot-driven stories, but relied far less on dialogue and extra characters, which can lead to a lack of characterization and development of relationships between characters. Let's see how that impacts the book's performance. First, as always, by looking into the allegiances. There are, of course, plenty of differences from The Darkest Hour thanks to the time skip in between these books. Greystripe is deputy in place of Whitestorm, and Cinderpelt has now taken an apprentice, Leafpaw. Longtail has, off-screen, been made an elder early thanks to being blinded by a rabbit, may his massive potential rest in peace, and Frostfur also joined the Elder's Den, presumably in her case because of old age. Golden Flower has moved back to the nursery for some reason. She doesn't have any kits, but apparently she decided to move back to the nursery before she became an elder. Sure. With Greystripe, Darkstripe, Longtail, Frostfur, and Goldenflower out of the Warrior's Den, there very well could have been a dip in the main population of the clan. But in the time since The Darkest Hour began, Thornclaw, Brightheart, Brambleclaw, Ashfur, Rainwhisker, and Sootfur have been made warriors, meaning the overall total went up from 10 cats to 11. That number will only increase as well, since Sorrelpaw, Rainwhisker and Sootfur's sister and Sandstorm's apprentice, was held back from being a warrior along with her brothers, for reasons that will be explained in the book, but is now about ready to get her name. In addition to her, there are 5 new apprentices in the clan. The aforementioned Leafpaw and her sister Squirrelpaw, plus Spiderpaw, Shrewpaw, and Whitepaw. Ferncloud appears to have moved straight into the nursery after getting her name, and knowing her future, that means that in her whole life she never spent any time as a warrior. And as I mentioned, Goldenflower joined her again, perhaps just for company. On the Elder side, One Eye and Smallear have passed away, but with Longtail and Frostfur joining them, there are still 4 elders. And now to briefly go over some important bits in the other clans. Blackstar has taken his place as leader, with Russetfur as his deputy. Running Nose moved to the Elder's Den, leaving Little Cloud as ShadowClan's sole medicine cat, and Tawnypelt is now a warrior. Deadfoot appears to have passed on in WindClan, and Tallstar chose Mudclaw as his replacement. Additionally, Mudclaw has an apprentice, Crowpaw. In RiverClan, Mistyfoot is now the deputy, and Mudfur has taken on someone named Mothwing to be his apprentice. Interesting that she already has a full name. I wonder if that will be explained. Also, Featherpaw and Stormpaw were made warriors, Feathertail and Stormfur. As far as the statistics, this book does quite well. The top 10 characters only have 76% of the lines, and even within those 10, they are spread far more evenly than in any first arc book. The cast in general is kept tighter, but all the characters that are included are given significant attention. In even better news, while 43% of the characters are she-cats, they have 46% of the lines. Clearly having a central group cast where half of them are she-cats and giving attention to the additional she-cat characters like Mothwing and Midnight is paying off. That's a pretty solid foundation. Let's see what Cherith does with it. We begin with a prologue from within StarClan, where Oakheart, Nightstar, Deadfoot, and Bluestar choose Feathertail, Tawnypelt, Crowpaw, and Brambleclaw respectively to represent and save the clans from whatever disaster they have foreseen. We then cut to Brambleclaw meeting Bluestar in a dream. She relays him the prophecy and tells him to meet with 3 other cats and listen to what Midnight tells them. Sorrelpaw made Sorreltail after being kept back due to being hit by a 2-leg monster and being injured for 3 moons. And Ferncloud has new kits, and since Dustpelt, the father, wants to stay with them for a couple of days, he asks Brambleclaw to take care of his apprentice, Squirrelpaw. Brambleclaw isn't thrilled with this news, as he considers her to be the biggest nuisance in ThunderClan. And in some regards, he is correct. She quickly proves herself to be quick-witted, talkative, and unafraid to challenge authority if she thinks they're being stupid. Firestar comes to talk with Brambleclaw after the ceremony and asks if he misses his sister, Sunnypelt, which Brambleclaw of course does. Squirrelpaw sneaks away from her mentor Dustpelt multiple times, often running into and getting into arguments with Brambleclaw while out, but when Squirrelpaw is punished with tick duty, Brambleclaw offers to help her. Leafpaw, meanwhile, thinks about the special magical connection she has to her sister Squirrelpaw, each always knowing what the other is feeling. She then heads to the gathering, where Tallstar begs Leopardstar to let his clan drink from their stream. She agrees after consulting her clanmates below. Here, we are also presented with new characters Hawkfrost and Mothwing, the kids of a rogue who were raised in RiverClan territory even though their mother left. Mothwing is also RiverClan's new medicine cat apprentice, something Mistyfoot, Blackfur, and many others find worrying. And Hawkfrost is a strong and scary warrior. Brambleclaw learns that Sunnypelt also received a StarClan dream with the same prophecy, and they agree to meet at the new moon in Four Trees and hope that the other two cats will show up too. Brambleclaw and Squirrelpaw do some more arguing and getting annoyed with each other, and then they meet Crowpaw, who attacked Brambleclaw for calling him a thief while he was on their territory and gets told off for it. Then, as promised, he goes to Four Trees to meet the other cats and finds that Squirrelpaw followed him. We are then introduced to the group that will be central to this arc. In addition to Bramble and Squirrel, Sunnypelt, Feathertail, Stormfur, and Crowpaw come along to the meeting and wait. Nothing seems to happen though, so they agree to meet again at a later time. And this gives time for StarClan to send Brambleclaw a dream of salty water. He talks to Ravenpaw about this, who tells him about the Sundrown place, and soon our cats sneak off on a journey to find it. Only stopped by Crowpaw refusing to follow Brambleclaw, and a 3-chapter side story of Firestar trying to keep Brambleclaw and Squirrelpaw apart very blatantly, thanks to a misinterpreted prophecy from Cinderpelt. Interestingly, being kept apart is what made Brambleclaw finally start seeking Squirrelpaw out, in comparison to before when he wanted nothing to do with her. Leafpaw sees her sister and Brambleclaw off, gives them traveling herbs, and promises to keep their secret. The 6 cats then travel a lot, spending time with Ravenpaw, crossing thunder paths, navigating through two-lake places, getting stuck in fences, fighting kitty pets, and escaping dogs. One after the other, they also each get their own saltwater signs to show that they are going in the right direction. Oh, and Purdy. How could I forget Purdy? The old, well-meaning, but possibly not all-there tomcat who helps them get away from the dogs and attempts to guide them through the two-leg place. He's a charming fellow at least, even if he's less than helpful and quite irritating to our cast. Leafpaw telepathically sends Squirrelpaw the cure for a rat bite Sunnypelt acquired thanks to Purdy, and they finally get the rest of the way to the Sundrown place. Brambleclaw does drown just a tad, but then they get to the cave where they meet Midnight, a badger who can speak cat, fox, and rabbit, along with presumably her own language, and who communicates with StarClan. She says that they came here to hear that 2 lakes were destroying the forest, and they had to journey to get that message so they could become one, and return to the clans as a united force. They resolve to go back and make the clans leave the forest, and we get an epilogue where Leafpaw witnesses 2-leg monsters invading the forest and tearing down the trees. So, thoughts? StarClan is now, even outside the 9 life ceremonies, a concrete place where dead cats live, communicate, and receive prophecies to pass on to the living. Knowing that StarClan doesn't actually create the prophecies, but instead just decides what to do with them, is a big step to depowering them as ancestors. So as we move into later arcs and uses of these star-coded cats, just remember where it started. I just find it interesting that in his very first appearance as deputy, Greystripe had Brackenfur organize patrols in his place. This is the main job of a deputy, Greystripe. What is it that you do? Brambleclaw's first impression of Hawkfrost is that he doesn't like him and thinks he seems dangerous. I do wish this insight would stick around, but just keep this in mind for later books. This book also introduces something completely new to the series, multiple point-of-view characters. In addition to Brambleclaw, Leafpaw acts as a POV for 7 of the 24 chapters, along with the epilogue. Well, pieces of those 7 chapters anyway, since this book tried the style of using Leafpaw until they didn't need to anymore, and then switching to Brambleclaw's point of view with no warning in the middle of multiple chapters. I'm glad that style doesn't stick around for long because it's quite confusing. In the time Leafpaw does get, though, other than giving us a camera into ThunderClan and thinking about Squirrelpaw, she doesn't have much to do in this book, and she doesn't feel, think, or do anything consistently enough to define her character beyond nice medicine cat who cares about her sister. Well, with the exception of her opinions on Mothwing. From the beginning, she empathizes with her, comforts her, roots for her to be the best medicine cat she can be, and calls her beautiful in her head at every opportunity. It's nothing more than that yet, she is an apprentice after all, but it's interesting to see. She also has a mild friendship with Sorreltail, enjoying her company and seeking her out whenever she needs a warrior beside her in duties. Of course, other than being more excitable than Leafpaw, Swirltail isn't all that intricate of a character either here, so she doesn't provide much. Leafpaw may be lacking for now, but what about the real meat of the book? The 6 traveling cats. Let's take a look at each, starting with the protagonist of the hour. Brambleclaw is already very different from the Bramblepaw we knew in the first arc. For one, where Bramblepaw was always the reserved straight man who only stood up when he had something important to say, Brambleclaw is pretty emotional with a strong temper and ambition even within the small group he is a part of on the way to the Sundrown Place. He did end up getting that position, mostly by virtue of having the first saltwater sign and nothing else, but it was challenged by both apprentices on the journey. Considering he is both hoping to lead this group and is the point of view from which we see this group, it would be nice if he grew close to the other cats over the course of his journey. But Sunnypelt, Feathertail, and Stormfur are all warriors he already knows and is moderately friendly with all the way through the book. And Crowpaw and Squirrelpaw are both cats who stand up to him and who he finds annoying because of this, something he mentions at every opportunity and never gets over. When problems do turn up with Crowpaw or Squirrelpaw, he usually asks someone else to deal with it for him, and make them do what he wants since they won't listen to him. Not only is that not a great technique for leadership, it's also not at all a good way to bond with the other main characters in your arc. Squirrelpaw is an outspoken and feisty young she-cat who is eager to do anything she thinks she can, whether or not she should, and doesn't care about the scolding she receives either from her mentor Dustpelt or from Brambleclaw. However, there are things she cares deeply about and won't hurt or ruin, such as the relationship she has with Leafpaw and, later, to a lesser extent, Sunnypelt and Feathertail. She doesn't appreciate when others try to fight for her, as she likes to prove herself by speaking for herself. She's actually quite clever, just a bit too energetic at times, which can get her in tight situations as often as it can get her out of them. Sunnypelt is a serious and assertive she-cat who doesn't put up with anyone else's nonsense and is focused on getting the job done. She has a level head and comes up with plenty of the group's ideas. That's about all we get from her, though. She keeps the group grounded. Our Riverclan cats are both fairly bland, but Feathertail seems more emotional, where her brother Stormfur is more stoic. They're both pretty generic good warriors and work as a pair more often than not. However, we do get to see a bit of their dynamic in how Stormfur comforts and protects his sister as a strong man while she gets to be more careless about her actions and reach out to others on an emotional level. Stormfur also seems to really like Squirrelpaw, and Feathertail seems to really like Crowpaw. Speaking of Crowpaw, he's a cat who clearly and desperately wants to seem professional and in charge, but he doesn't take well to anyone remotely trying to order him around or implying that he is lesser than anyone else because he is an apprentice. He has a temper, much like Brambleclaw, but with a sharp tongue that stays around even when he isn't outright angry. This leads him to come in conflict with almost every cat in the group, especially Brambleclaw and Squirrelpaw, where the exception is Feathertail, who doesn't want conflict with anyone. All of these cats have at least a couple good lines in this book and show off enough personality that it's easy to imagine them interacting enough to grow close and become friends for life. But that hasn't happened yet. They're just getting started on their real quest after all, and it's only the first book of the arc. Unfortunately, Midnight says at the end of the book that they have become one, implying the end of character bonding and growth that simply hasn't happened. If we ignored her line and took this book as the beginning, it would be a perfectly good book. But if this is all the bonding this group will share, it doesn't bode well for how they will handle conflicts they will clearly face in the future. But still, this book on its own is alright. It's not perfect, and there are ways you could improve it with different point-of-view characters or removing Firestar's Keep Squirrel and Bramble Apart plot entirely, but it's not bad. Still, the new prophecy has a whole 5 more books to go, so let's wait to give judgment calls on the whole of this story until we see the next pieces in our trip through time.